Dacus from New York for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses who are here today. What is equally as important as the CCP's actions to cover up and conceal the origins of COVID is understanding what role our government may have played in the origins of this virus and to what level, if any, that the health officials and members of our media attempted to conceal or hide the truths from the American people. The questions surrounding American tax dollars being used to potentially fund the origins of this virus and attempts to suppress them, that is what I'm here to focus on today. In November of 2021, Dr. Fauci told Senator Rand Paul under oath that the NIH did not fund gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab, despite having been explicitly told in an email in January of 2021 that NIH had a monetary relationship with the Wuhan Institute through the EcoHealth Alliance. During the committee's initial origins hearing in March, I asked former CDC Director Dr. Redfield whether the NIH was funding or had funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute, and he told me, direct quote, "No doubt," unquote, NIH was funding this research in Wuhan, refuting Dr. Fauci's claims. I'll start with you, Mr. Ratcliffe. Do you agree with Dr. Redfield?
I do.
Given what we know now, if you were in Dr. Fauci's position, would you have denied that the NIH's role in gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab?
No.
Do you think that Dr. Fauci lied under oath?
I think that some of Dr. Fauci's testimony is inconsistent with some of the intelligence that we have that remains classified, as well as inconsistent with some information that is publicly available.
Do you think that President Biden should declassify all information related to COVID origins, every single document as was requested and passed by the legislature?
Well, with the caveat that we always have to be careful about protecting our sources and methods, particularly those sources and methods as it relates to what the intelligence community uniformly agrees is our #1 threat from a nation-state actor standpoint. But with that caveat, providing as much information about our intelligence as possible while preserving those sources and methods should absolutely take place.
Thank you.
As soon as possible.
Mr. Feith, do you agree with Dr. Redfield's original testimony that this funding, which very well likely played a role in the virus, came from actually, let me back up and fill you guys in. So even more troubling, at the time, when my time was expiring at the last hearing, Dr. Redfield testified that not only did American tax dollars fund gain-of-function research through the NIH, but also from that the Wuhan lab received money from State Department, USAID, and the Department of Defense. Do you agree with Dr. Redfield's testimony that this funding, which very likely played a role in the virus, came from these government agencies?
My understanding is consistent with what you've read back in terms of the many funding sources that ran, from Washington to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and certainly if the COVID origin is indeed a lab leak from there, it was from bat coronavirus research programs, some of which were funded by the United States government.
Okay, because we had previously heard about the NIH funding, but up until that hearing, I had not heard that it was potentially the State Department, USAID, and the Department of Defense that had also funded Wuhan lab activities. So the U.S. government determined that the Wuhan lab collaborated on publications and special projects, top secret projects, with the CCP military since at least 2017. Knowing this, for what purpose would U.S. Department of Defense funding be provided to the Wuhan lab?
Well, I think for a full answer, I defer to folks from DOD and from the DOD, biodefense, relevant components. But in principle, the kind of broad theme of the funding, as I always understood it, across different parts of our government, NIH and USAID and state and otherwise, was based on a certain theory of pandemic prevention by scooping up these viruses, playing with them in the lab, and then trying to design vaccines and therapies. But there were always warnings that this was extremely dangerous work. and that the work courted exactly the kind of danger that appears to have happened in Wuhan. And from our perspective at the parts of the State Department that don't specialize in this, part of what was most troubling is that when COVID broke out in Wuhan, practically on the doorsteps of that lab, we did not have folks from other parts of the government raising their hand to educate the non-experts across the government in how plausible this was and how it needed to be taken seriously. In fact, the folks from the other parts of the government that work these issues generally were deflecting attention, and that cost us a lot of time and understanding that was really damaging.
All right, well, I've run out of time. And Mr. Ratcliffe, you have anything to add to that? Because I saw you nodding your head. If not, I'll defer back to the chairman. Thank you.
Now recognize Dr. Barra from California for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.